Hi, welcome to Audiobook Academy. This is a self-paced audiobook. There's no need to keep an eye on things. Just pay attention. Thank you for taking the time to listen. This is a book summary of A Life on Our Planet by David Attenborough. No matter how many times a disaster strikes, are there any lessons to be learned from it? A study conducted in 2008 by academic researcher Maxwell Boykoff examined the coverage of climate change in the most widely circulated UK tabloids. Environmental issues have traditionally been of little interest to the general public. An important finding from Boykoff's investigation into environmental representations was that we pay attention to the environment when it has a direct impact on our lives. We pay attention to the environment when it has a direct impact on our lives, said Boykoff. As a result, when we experience the consequences of a natural disaster, we pay attention to the planet. He has dedicated his life to educating us about our planet and making debates visible through his captivating storytelling. A Life on Our Planet is a stunning documentary about naturalist and national treasure David Attenborough's life and achievements. It's easy to despair about the state of our planet, but David Attenborough gives us reason to be optimistic. Many of our planet's most memorable natural history documentaries are directed by Sir David Attenborough. In A Life on Our Planet, he tells the story of his life's journey toward preserving wildlife and restoring our planet's wilderness, as well as the consequences of our current destructive path if we don't change our ways. Pripyat was featured prominently in the HBO series Chernobyl, which may have introduced you to the town. As if by magic, Pripyat went from a pleasant, bustling town to a nightmarish disaster zone overnight. The Soviet Union constructed Pripyat in the 1970s in Ukraine. It was made for those who worked at the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Chernobyl's reactor number 4 exploded on April 26, 1986, and Pripyat residents were forced to evacuate. It's the most devastating environmental disaster to date because of carelessness, poor planning, and human error. In the year 2021, a much more serious threat is on the horizon. This is the tragedy of our time, and it can be averted if we take immediate and decisive action. A 94-year-old eyewitness account of a Pripyat citizen. Attenborough's fascination with wildlife began at an early age. As a child in 1937, he would ride his bicycle out into the countryside from his Leicester home to study fossils in the rocks. During Earth's 4 billion-year lifespan, there have been 5 mass extinctions that resulted from massive eruptions on a specific point in time, according to his research. Anything larger than a dog was thought to have been wiped out by a meteorite that struck Earth in the most recent event. Nature had to start from the beginning again. However, this time around, it was designed with humans in mind. Attenborough begins each chapter of his memoir with 3 facts, which he believes have pushed our planet toward a critical point. Let's go back to 1937, when the world's population was 2.3 billion people, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were 280 parts per million, and 66% of the land was still undeveloped. It's disheartening to look back 83 years and see how far we've come. There are 7.8 billion people on the planet and 415 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The remaining wilderness is 35%. These simple statistics speak as eloquently for our planet as our author does. We've destroyed the ocean's natural beauty in the span of a single person's lifetime. There is 70% of our planet's surface covered by oceans, and it's where all life began. In part, this is due to the technical challenges of filming underwater. While filming A Baitball Frenzy, the Blue Planet's advanced camera equipment captured an incredible underwater hunt that had never been seen before. It begins with tuna driving baitfish into clumps, before sharks, dolphins, gannets, and even a whale join the attack. Overfishing has reduced the abundance of these marine marvels, and as a result of the chain reactions that have resulted, our oceans are on the verge of extinction. In contrast to land chains, which may only have 3 food chain links, such as grass, to wildebeest and lion, in the sea there are about 5, so if we overfish at one point, we collapse the entire system. And, regrettably, the damage we do does not stop with fish. The end of coral reefs in the world. In 1998, a crew from the Blue Planet series discovered that the coral reef's vibrant colors were fading into a skeletal white. And that's exactly what these reefs were turning into, skeletal remains. Polyps, tiny creatures that build reefs by forming walls of calcium carbonate to protect themselves, are responsible for the vibrant colors of a coral reef. Their relationship is mutually beneficial. The algae absorbs sunlight, which in turn fuels the polyp's ability to catch prey as it swims by and thus enable the coral colony to flourish. Stressed polyps, on the other hand, evict their algae partners, resulting in the skeletonization of the polyps. There is a why to all of this, and it relates to global warming. CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels contribute to global warming because of the greenhouse effect. As a result of global warming, oceans absorb the excess heat. The bleached coral, as David Attenborough points out, is like a canary in a mine. The Arctic regions are also impacted in the same way. Crews on Frozen Planet noticed that summer sea ice had decreased by 30% in 30 years and glaciers had shrunk in size by a factor of 2. Whenever the ice melts away, so does the algae that grows on top of the water. This algae is essential because it serves as the beginning of the food chains in the Arctic and Antarctic. Polar bears rely on ice for hunting launching pads. The longer they have to wait for the ice to return, the more fat they use up. These underweight cubs are less likely to survive because their mothers give birth to smaller cubs as a result of climate change when they're not hunting. Walruses rest on the sea ice, which is becoming increasingly crowded due to shrinking ice sheets. However, because of their poor eyesight, they often fall from the cliff's highest points as the sea's scent beckons them closer. 80 million metric tons of seafood are dredged up each year only to be replaced with plastic. Did you know that the northern Pacific Ocean is currently home to 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic littering the landscape? Waste continues to be dumped into the ocean, trapping and devouring marine life. Freshwater, too, is at risk. The world's 50,000 large dams have a significant impact on river water flow and temperature. Chemicals and pesticides are dumped into these rivers, killing aquatic life and birds. To catch fish, Attenborough has observed fishermen using mosquito nets, which he says he first saw in his more recent travels. The future of our planet is in jeopardy. This, according to Sir David Attenborough, we run life on the planet to meet our own purposes. In rainforests, there is an incredible and delicate web of interconnected relationships. Floral and seed production occur in a continuous cycle in these tropical climates as the seasons merge into one another. Orangutans, too, have a role to play in this by dispersing seeds as they forage for fruit ripeness. As a result, half of the world's rainforests have been destroyed, and the orangutan population on the island of Borneo has decreased by a third. We are fascinated by nature, but only 4% of the world's mammals are found in the wild. 1/4 of our small predators and pollinators have vanished. Pesticides and overgrazing are commonplace, and topsoil has been removed from much of the world's fertile land. Every year, we consume 50 billion chickens that are fed on deforestation-free soy grown on deforestation-free land. Bernhard Grzimek, a German scientist, realized in the 1950s that the Serengeti's wildlife was in danger and needed the entire plains to survive. Animals and their predators would starve if they couldn't move to new grazing areas. The Serengeti migration sacred paths were protected by Tanzania and Kenya, which is fortunate. In spite of stories like this, including Dian Fossey's work with gorilla populations, and the establishment of tiger reserves in India, wildlife habitats are becoming more and more threatened. The point at which things begin to change for the better. As our GDPs show, the so-called Great Acceleration since World War II has brought us many progressive developments. There is a darker side to the use of energy, production, transportation, agriculture, and telecommunication. It is easy to see a rapid rise in the negative consequences of human activity: carbon dioxide emissions, methane emissions, land and marine habitat loss, and the expansion of agricultural land use. A great decline is inevitable as a result of this unsustainable trajectory. So, how do we know when something is critical? The Planetary Boundaries model was developed by a team of scientists led by Johan Rockström and Will Stefan. This model outlines 9 critical thresholds or planetary boundaries, such as climate change, air pollution, land conversion, and biodiversity loss, among other things. As long as any one of them is ignored, our planet's balance is put at risk. In 4 of these 9, we've already crossed over the line. If we don't change, what will the next 100 years look like? Speculations for the next decade. As a result of forest dieback, the Amazon rainforest could become an uninhabitable savanna and lose its biodiversity. Water and food shortages and the displacement of up to 30 million people could hasten this catastrophe. More carbon in the atmosphere and fewer trees would lead to significant increases in global warming. The Arctic would see its first summers without ice. For example, ice would not allow algal forests to grow, harming the ocean food chain. As a result, the Arctic will no longer be able to cool the planet. Predictions for the decade of 2040. Temperature rises in the Arctic will cause the permafrost beneath the tundra to thaw, causing the soil beneath it to collapse. Climate change would be worsened by 1,400 gigatons of carbon released into the atmosphere as landslides and floods would occur. For the 2050s, here are some of our predictions. The ocean's capacity to absorb carbon dioxide increases with increased emissions. Carbon dioxide, however, undergoes a chemical transformation into carbonic acid as a result. Acid is bad for coral reefs, and within a few years, 90% of our reefs will be gone. As a result of the acid, plankton would also be destroyed and the food chain would be affected. Speculations about the future. The farming industry would be thrown into disarray. Droughts and flooding would become more frequent, soil would be depleted, and insects and bees would be wiped out. Our food crops could fail by as much as 3/4, according to current estimates. As the natural environment deteriorates, pandemics are expected to rise. Who knows what the early 21st century will bring? Humans may be forced to migrate in large numbers in the 22nd century, according to Attenborough. This could lead to cities like Rotterdam and Ho Chi Minh City being evacuated as sea levels rise. It is possible that the Earth could be 4 degrees Celsius hotter, making farming impossible in many areas. People would be forced to relocate, which would lead to border conflict, resulting in humanitarian crises. All of this might sound like something out of a horror film set after the end of the world. It's possible to reroute our course and reshape the gloom and doom we've created. Rewild the planet. Attenborough has a message for us. He thinks we should look to the Planetary Boundaries model for inspiration and guidance. Then again, there's a twist. Nearly half of the world's environmental damage is the result of the world's richest 16% of people. If we don't meet basic standards of human well-being, we'll have exceeded our planet's boundaries. This is the conclusion drawn by Oxford University economist Kate Raworth in her new book The Planetary Boundaries. This is a problem that environmental economists are working to solve. The Happy Planet Index takes into account both the country's ecological footprint and the well-being of its citizens. In fact, New Zealand dropped GDP as its official measure of progress in 2019 and created its own index, which included people, profit, and the environment, as well as the economy as a whole. However, we still have work to do. Understanding what nature is trying to tell us. There are some truly amazing things about our planet's plants, including algae and phytoplankton. Every day, they collect 3 trillion kilowatt-hours of solar energy. There must be a shift from fossil fuels to clean energy. Renewable energy sources, such as solar, wind, and water, could provide power. It has already begun. Without the use of fossil fuels, Iceland, Albania, and Paraguay generate their own electricity. 40% of the country's electricity is generated by renewable sources, and the country also exports solar power. If we expand our wilderness areas, of course, we have a natural way to store carbon. We also need to rebuild our seas to capture carbon, increase biodiversity, and increase food supply. 7% of the ocean is covered by no-fishing zones. However, if we established no-fishing zones in 1/3 of the sea, fish stocks could recover over time. A marine protected area was established in Mexico in 1990 because of overfishing. As a result of the fishermen who persevered despite the lack of food, the marine life in that area has grown 400%. Overfishing in international waters is an issue that is being addressed by the United Nations and the World Trade Organization, WTO. Rewilding mangroves, salt marshes, and kelp forests is also necessary in order to restore biodiversity. Even so, vested interests will slow us down, according to Attenborough. They are some of the world's largest businesses, heavy industry relies on fossil fuel, and there is a significant stock market investment. Taxes and carbon fees have a purpose, and that is to shift the problem. It's going to be extremely difficult to solve the problem of air travel, even with the development of electric and hydrogen planes. There's good news, electric vehicles have already arrived. We also have to be more efficient with our space. Agribusiness generates enormous amounts of greenhouse gas emissions and occupies an area larger than the combined area of North, South, and Australia Pacific combined. How can we reclaim farmland while also increasing our food supply? There are two approaches, one is regenerative, and the other is urban farming. We don't use any plowing or fertilizers. Cover crops and crop rotation are used instead, both of which are done after harvest to protect the soil. Rooftops, abandoned buildings and the exterior walls of city buildings are ideal locations for urban farming. We need to eat more plants. As much as 60% of farmland is devoted to beef production. But there's a silver lining. Nearly 40% of Americans and 1/3 of Britons are cutting back on their meat consumption as a result of recent surveys. Numerous new plant-based foods are on the market today. Biotech could one day use microorganisms to supply us with proteins. Half the land that we currently use seems to be sufficient for our needs. For rewilding to succeed, governments must offer financial incentives to create wilderness areas or involve the people of the area. Projects to reduce cattle herds and improve wildlife habitat are undertaken by the Maasai in Kenya. It is possible that farmers in developed countries could be rewarded for increasing the biodiversity of their land. In Costa Rica, for example, the government offered grants to farmers 25 years ago in order to replant native trees. Costa Rica's forests now cover more than half of the country. There are only so many people that can be supported by the earth. Around 1962, population growth reached its pinnacle. Today, the average number of children in a family is 2.5. However, we're still far from reaching the point at which the growth of our population will come to an end. There is also a rise in the average lifespan. The human population is expected to peak around 11 billion people in the early 22nd century, according to current projections. So that's it. Back to the beginning of the summary, shall we? In modern-day Pripyat, David Attenborough tells us that nature is once again claiming its place in the world. Flowers and fruit trees bloom in the forest, and wild animals come to feast on the nectar and pollen. That there would be any kind of happy ending after such a devastating environmental disaster is utterly implausible. However, the story's lesson is a positive one. Nature will seize any opportunity to reclaim lost territory. But there's still time to save face. Pripyat was largely written off by experts, and many of us are unconcerned about the state of the planet. We've taken a too little, too late attitude, but Pripyat tells us otherwise. Every person can make a difference, but we need to band together internationally and support the many people who are already working hard to save our planet. People in power and business leaders alike must set aside self-interested agendas in order to achieve a more universal goal. We regard the Earth as our planet, run by mankind for mankind, says Attenborough. If this is the case, then it is our responsibility to treat our planet with respect and courtesy. We all need to adopt a new way of thinking and put it into action immediately. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Please don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. See you in next audiobook.